Hi video game developers. In this first part I'm going to start with the Unit 4 Space Shooter game, and this will be part 1 where we download our assets and start getting set up. So I'm going to go to the Space Shooter game folder on Schoology. I'm going to click on the assets.zip file and I will right click, choose Save Link As, and I'll download it to my desktop so I can find it right away. Okay, with that taken care of, now on your screens, your icon will look a little different. It'll be white with a little zipper. You can just go ahead and double click. It'll then unzip, and you'll basically have this folder here called CC2 Game Assets, which stands for Crash Course 2 Game Assets. I'm going to go ahead and just change the name here. Go, and I'm going to delete the zip file. So when you open it up, you'll see that we have an enemy, we have 2 MP3 sound effects, we have a laser blast, we have our ship, and we have a simple space background. Okay, we can now go ahead and get into the setup and stencil. So this second game is going to be different than our first game in the sense that we are going to be starting from a complete blank canvas. We will not be starting from a downloaded kit like we did last time with the little green character and the clown. So we're going to click to create a new game, and this is really important. You want to start off with a blank game template. We'll say next, and I'd want you to call this Space Shooter, and I'm going to call this Demo since that's what I'm doing. You don't need to do that. I'll hit create, and now we have our blank setup. Okay, so we have nothing over here in our dashboard. We're starting off from scratch, and the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by entering in our cast of actors. So I'm going to go to Actor Types, and we're going to go ahead and make our first one be our player ship. Now again, you can change the names a little bit to whatever you want if you have some better ideas, but just try to memorize and understand which actor I'm referencing. Okay, so I'm going to bring in the animations. I'm going to click to add a frame. Double check your scale always. You want to make sure it says 1x so that way it is not being resized from the original. I'm going to say choose image. I'll go to my desktop and find my Space Shooter Assets folder, and here is the ship. Notice that the ship has 1, 2, 3, 4 versions of itself, and that means that it's an animation. It has 4 frames, so what you need to do for Stencil to recognize the frames is you need to change columns. And we're going to change it from 1 to 4. And now you'll see these black lines in between showing you that Stencil recognizes the 4 frames. And when you hit add, you'll see a little animation up here. The last step is we always want to get in the habit of changing the default animation. Should be changed from animation 0 to default. And that's going to happen with every actor, whatever your default animation is going to be. Typically you want to name it default, and you can tell it's the default animation because it has the little star right next to it. Okay, I'm going to bring in my next actor. So create an actor type. This will be the enemy. This one's much simpler. We have no animation on this, although you could do an animation. And all I need to do is change it to default. And I'll go ahead and save my game. And I'll bring in the third and final actor, and this will be the lasers. Now the hardest thing here is that if you look at the graphic, you have to know that your ship will be firing 2 blasts at a time. So think about the columns. And if you look here, it looks a little confusing, but the columns should be set up to 3. And you can see right now it kind of makes sense. 2 blasts for each frame, and you can see the little animation right there. Again, switch to default and save your game. Okay, we're going to go back now and we're going to set the physics and the properties. These are the two things you want to get in the habit of doing when you make your actors, when you bring them in. So I'm going to go to my ship first and I'm going to do physics, and I'm going to say that it's a normal actor so it can move. I don't want it to rotate and I don't want it affected by gravity. There's no gravity because we're in outer space, and also I just don't need things falling. Everything's just going to be kind of a top-down looking at the ship. Okay, so that's all set. I'm going to do the same thing for the enemy, no rotation, no gravity, and the lasers, physics, no rotation, no gravity. Save game. Okay, now I want to set up the player groups. And you can of course do this in any order you want, but I'm going to go to the player ship and I'm going to change the players group to players. I'm then going to go to edit groups and I'm going to make a couple new ones here. So I'm going to click on create new and I'll create one called enemies, create, and I'll create a new one and we'll call this one, you could call it projectiles. You could also call it lasers for the lasers that are going to hit us. I'm going to go ahead and try projectiles. And you can always change this later if you make a mistake. Okay, so now I have to set up the collision groups. So I want projectiles are going to collide with enemies. There are no tiles in this game. And I'm going to set up, now these projectiles are, initially they're going to be the lasers that the player is shooting at the enemies, at the bad guys. And so later on we'll have the enemy shooting back at us. We'll see. And we might need to add in another group to do that. Alright, let's set up our enemies. Our enemies we want, that's set up for projectiles, so that's good. Let's see, our enemies can collide with our players. And let's set up our players. Players can collide with tiles, although that doesn't really matter. Enemies, there we go. And we don't want our players to collide with the projectiles because then the player ship would be colliding with its own laser blast. And that would mess up physics. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now that we've set up our groups by making them, we now need to actually set the groups. So our player ship is in players. Our enemy is set up to enemies. And our lasers are set up to projectiles. Okay, good. We're all set up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our star background. So we'll go to background, click to create a background, call it stars, click to add a frame, choose the image, we'll choose our background image, hit add. Over here on the right hand side we want it to have a vertical scroll speed, and I'm not really sure what I want the speed to be, so I'm just going to go ahead and try it with 1. I'm going to leave it at up, and I'm going to go ahead and say repeat background, check that off to yes. Save my game, and I'm going to leave this tab open because the vertical scroll speed, I might be wrong with the whole up and down, so I might want to come back and check that out. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and create my very first scene. So I'll go to scenes, create a very first scene, call this level 1. Not going to worry about the background color because I'll be adding in my stars background, and here it is right here. I now want to load in my background, so I'm going to come over here to my layers, and I'm going to click on the little new layer plus button. I'm going to say new background layer, and I'll choose my stars background. Say OK. And you'll notice that it comes in on top of the original layer. I don't want it on top, I always want my background on the bottom. So I'm going to select it, and then I'll click on this little downward triangle to move it down. Okay, so I'm going to now go ahead and test my scene and just see if the background is scrolling at the right speed and if it's scrolling in the correct direction. Okay, so it's moving upwards, which is what I want. It's going to make it look like, actually no, I think I want it, yeah, I want it going the opposite way. Sorry about that. So I want it going the opposite way, so it doesn't look like the ship is going in reverse. So I'm going to say down, and I want it to go a little bit faster, so maybe I'll change it to 2, and I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to pause. Okay, so now you can see, I paused the video, and now you can see that it's scrolling in the correct direction, and I think it's a pretty good speed. I can, of course, tweak that if I want. Okay, so I'm going to do one last thing, and then this video will be done. I'm going to import these sounds, so I'll go to Sounds, Import, and the first one, again, if you don't know what your sounds are, here we go, Space Shooter Assets. My first one is Explosion, and then my second one is the actual soundtrack here. Okay, so do Explosion, spell that correctly, create. Okay, so real important, you have to choose the sound type. Is it a sound effect or is it music? So this is a sound effect, import MP3, go ahead and bring it in. Now you won't be able to hear this in the recording, but I can tell you that it is in fact playing correctly. Okay, so that one's all set up. Go ahead and close that. Bring in my second one, and this one's going to be, let's see, the soundtrack. So this is the soundtrack, and I'm going to go ahead and do, level 1 soundtrack. And that's just a nice way of labeling things, so that way if I want a different soundtrack for level 2, I'm all set. Alright, so all I need to do is change it to a music sound type, import the MP3, choose the song, bring it in. Okay, so again, you can't hear it in the screencast recording, but you just have to trust me that it is in fact playing. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the basics. Everything is set up. My actors are in place. In part 2 of the video, we'll actually start doing some assembly and of course the code to make it all work. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in part 2.